So what do you think will happen in the future?
Many of these prosecutors got their offices, these politically energized prosecutors who
Mm.
bring these cases, uh, became prosecutors because they were elected to those positions with the financial help of George Soros or one of his foundations. George Soros is a very far left individual, a
Mhm.
billionaire. Most prosecutor races traditionally, if you had two guys running for that prosecutor's office, they might each spend five or $10,000 for that
Mhm.
race. George Soros comes in and drops $250,000 behind his candidate. He just bought that seat. They're running TV ads, they're running newspaper ads.
Mhm.
The normal prosecutors are not competitive anymore. Once George Soros gets his prosecutor into that office, they're in there specifically for political decision making.
Mhm.
So they do things like say, we will no longer prosecute property crimes. If you go in and you loot your local CVS pharmacy, we're not going to prosecute you.
Mhm.
So what happens? All the CVS pharmacies get looted. And then they also say, well, if you're a cop and you shoot somebody, we're going to go after you hard.
Mhm.
So these become the entire criminal justice structure in those jurisdictions becomes politically energized.
So this is the guy that funds a lot of this stuff?
Right.
And so basically a prosecutor will run and they can't make it unless they go with his agenda,
Yeah. So
essentially.
traditional prosecutors are generally old guys or they could be gals in the legal community. They've practiced law there for decades.
Mhm.
They've been lower level prosecutors for decades.
Mhm.
And they decide, you know what, I'd like to throw my hat in for the big seat for the
Mhm.
prosecutor's office. Um, but they don't have much money. They don't have much political expertise. And they're just normal run of the mill prosecutors. They're well intentioned civil servants just trying to do a good job for their community.
Mhm.
George Soros will pick someone who's a firebrand left wing lawyer and say, I want you to be the prosecutor and do left wing things in that
Mhm.
office. Here's $250,000 and buy him the seat.
So it'll be interesting to see what Trump does, if this stuff will still be able to like happen, or what do you think? Because that's so much money. How do you go up against that?
Yeah, unless you can match the money, how would you go up against it? I think we're going to
Sure.
find it's going to require some creative legal opportunities. Now, the federal government has a lot of implicit authority.
Mhm.
Strictly speaking, of course, I mean, how much should the federal government have to do with a local prosecutor, right?
Mhm.
But all these cities get a lot of money from the federal government. The
Mhm.
federal government starts saying, listen, unless you start prosecuting property crimes again, we're cutting off the spigot. Could apply enough pressure to get someone else in the job.
Mhm.
And every once in a while, increasingly, these Soros prosecutors are getting thrown out of office.
Mhm.
I know the one in LA or San Francisco, for example, just lost his run for reelection.
Mhm.
Michael Brown was in Ferguson, Missouri.
Mhm.
He was a very large black gentleman who was walking down the middle of a street, and a patrol car came up and yelled at him to get on the sidewalk, get out of the street. And Michael Brown attacked that police officer in his patrol car, fought him for control of the officer's pistol. We know this because the pistol in the struggle discharged inside the patrol car and took a chunk of a little piece of Michael Brown's hand. His DNA was found inside the car.
Mhm.
So we know there was a fight for the gun there. Then Michael Brown ran off. The police officer chased him on foot. Police officer said, "Halt, police." Michael Brown turned around. Michael Brown was about 250 pounds. The police officer was about 160.
Mhm.
Michael Brown turned around, looked at the officer, and charged at him, hands extended. And the officer shot him as he was being charged and killed him. The news stories were that this officer executed Michael Brown for no reason. Michael Brown had his hands up, is the narrative. Hands up, like he was surrendering. He had his hands up. He was reaching for the officer's throat when the officer shot him. And the officer knew this guy was going to fight him for his gun because he'd already done it. That was a perfectly lawful shooting. But here's an interesting example. So the prosecutor in that jurisdiction said, well, I'm going to present the facts and the law to a grand jury and let the
Mhm.
grand jury decide whether this goes to trial. Normally, a grand jury is a completely one sided affair because the prosecutor is not obliged to share evidence of innocence with the grand jury. They're
Mhm.
only obliged to share evidence of guilt. And if we ever only hear one side of a story, it sounds pretty compelling, right?
Mhm.
So normally a grand jury only hears from the prosecutor. They only hear the prosecutor's side, so they return an indictment,
Mhm.
guaranteed.
Mhm.
What this prosecutor did was say, you know what, grand jury, I'm going to show you all the evidence consistent with guilt and the evidence consistent with innocence, all of it, which he
Mhm.
doesn't have to do.
Mhm.
The grand jury looked at all that evidence and they refused to indict that police officer.
Mhm.
You know what happened next? That prosecutor, who had been the prosecutor in that jurisdiction for more than 30 years, The next time he was up for re-election, George Soros came to town, financed a competitor against him, and that guy lost his career to a George Soros
No.
financed candidate.
And is it difficult to become a prosecutor? Is that something that's hard to like competitive? I don't really know.
I mean, it would vary by jurisdiction. You know, in
Mhm.
big cities, prosecutors have more power and influence, so it
Mhm.
would be more competitive. Most people don't live in big cities; they live in rural areas, and
Mhm.
there it's again, it's just some guy who's been around a long time in the legal profession, been a prosecutor for a few
Mhm.
years, and decides he'd like that job for a little while.
I'm just wondering if he loses his career as a prosecutor, can he get hired again? Like what?
Oh, he wouldn't need it. I mean, he was probably 60 by this
Oh,
point, so I'm
okay.
sure he just retired.
Right. That's so crazy. So the prosecutors are often,
And that's a lesson, by the way.
yeah.
That was done as a lesson. That was done as a lesson to every other prosecutor in the country. If you have a case like this and you present a fair narrative to the grand jury, when we want you to go after that cop, we're going to cost you your career. We're going to come in here, give a competitor $250,000 at your next election, and you're going to lose. So now other prosecutors are looking at this, and what happens when they get a case like this?
Mhm.
You think they're going to treat it in a fair way with the grand jury?
No.
Or you think they're going to get on board like that police chief and say, well, either I can be destroyed with this police officer or I can join the team destroying him?
There's incentive to basically be unlawful in a lot of these cases. If they become, you really want to avoid getting anything politically motivated.
Yeah.
Like in these
You want to be
self-defense
off the
cases.
radar
Yeah,
screen.
you don't want anyone to know about your case.
Yep.
So, do you think that police officers are going to have a hard time recruiting people?
They can't
Because
recruit right now. Most major urban police departments are hundreds or thousands of people short in
really,
terms of how many police officers they need.
yeah, because why would you do it?
Yep.
Especially if you're seeing them throw, men doing their jobs under the
And when they
bus,
can recruit, they're not getting top level people.
right?
Those top level people can go become computer programmers or sell cars or do something else.
Hmm.